What is zero trust? Well, that depends. Who's asking? Zero trust is critical to protect us from hackers and cybercrime in the modern world. Before we talk about what zero trust is, let's start by talking about what zero trust is not. It is not a piece of new technology. It is not a protocol. It is not a product that you go out, you buy, you set up, and suddenly you have zero trust. Now, it's better to describe zero trust as a security concept or a framework. The goal is to trust nothing. Instead, we must continuously authenticate, authorize, and assess every user and every device. Zero trust is achieved using a mixture of security policies and the right security tools. And speaking of tools, let me say a big thank you to our sponsor of this video, TwinGate. TwinGate offers super easy, highly configurable remote access to your home or business network. Using advanced user authentication, limiting users to just what's needed, and assessing the security health of your device makes TwinGate a great tool for our zero trust arsenal. We'll talk more about this later, and I'll show you how you can get started implementing your own zero trust using TwinGate. By the way, it's not going to cost you anything. Okay, so to fully understand the problem that zero trust solves, we need to go back a few years. A traditional network looks something like this. We have our computers, our servers, and our applications sitting inside our network. These are all protected from the outside world by our routers and our firewalls. This is called perimeter-based security. Because all of these devices are owned by the business and connected to the same network, we can control them using things like group policy for configuration or Active Directory for authentication, and our firewalls control which traffic is allowed in and out. We can even control the physical access to the devices and the infrastructure by controlling who has access to the buildings or the server rooms. We use things like ID cards and passcodes. We call this the trusted network because we have complete control over these devices. Everything on the outside, however, which we don't control, this is called the untrusted network. People often use the analogy of a medieval castle to describe this approach. The castle protects everything inside from the outside attackers with high walls and moats. Now, this setup worked well for a long time. However, the idea of perimeter security has been facing challenges in recent years. Some of these challenges that businesses are facing are cloud computing and web apps. Now, most businesses are using a combination of web applications and cloud computing services. These applications and services can be accessed from anywhere on any device. Remote working. Users are not always in the physical office network. Sometimes they're working from home, in a coffee shop, or any other public Wi-Fi. How do we then provide access to the resources the user needs while still ensuring they're using a safe connection? And how can we ensure they actually are, in fact, who they say they are? User-owned devices. Users are not always using company-owned devices. Users may want to use their own phones or tablets or laptops to connect to the corporate data and services. Well, then how do we ensure that these devices are free from malware and secure enough to access our company resource? And one of the biggest problems with perimeter-based security is something called lateral movement. If an attacker can find just one weakness in the perimeter and get access, then the explicit trust gives the attacker access to the other resources within the network. All of these problems have gradually been increasing in recent years. However, the pandemic skyrocketed these, and it was clear that the traditional perimeter security approach was no longer able to protect this new way of working. So a new solution needed to be found, and this brings us to zero trust. Now, I've said this already, but zero trust is not a single product that can be implemented overnight. It's a security architecture that needs to be built over time using different technologies, products, and policies. Many security vendors have their own approach to zero trust and how it can be implemented. But I'm going to be talking about some of the core principles that make up zero trust. And then we're going to get hands-on with a real-world example. At its core, zero trust does exactly what it says on the tin. It removes all trust in users, devices, and networks. A phrase often used to describe this is never trust, always verify. It doesn't matter if you're sitting in a coffee shop, at home, or in the office behind company firewalls, you are treated exactly the same. You are only trusted once you can prove otherwise. Now, I like to call this guilty until proven innocent. Now, the way to prove your innocence is to be verified. This is done based on several factors, including things like credentials, the device being used, and the location of the request. For example, let's say you want to access a company resource. Before your request is granted, your credentials will be checked to ensure you are who you say you are. You may then be prompted for an MFA. This is all pretty standard stuff. But then, we can go further by checking things like the security health of your device. This could include checking that the operating system is up to date and that endpoint protection is installed. Your geolocation could also be looked at. Maybe only requests from certain countries will be accepted, countries where the business only operates in, for example. Several of these checks can be made before you are verified. The key point here, though, is even if you pass verification once, that does not automatically mean you are trusted. A key part of Zero Trust is that every request should be continuously and dynamically verified every single time. This stops hackers from taking advantage of things like open sessions and trusted access. Okay, as the name suggested, Zero Trust is all about removing all trust from every request. But there is more to it than that. The next principle is that of least privilege. Now, least privilege means only providing the minimum level of privilege needed to do a task. Seems pretty obvious, right? Well, this is often easier said than done. Implementing this in applications and services not designed for Zero Trust can sometimes be tricky. As humans, we also want to be as helpful as possible, often giving much more access to users than needed, or giving access temporarily and never actually removing it. This is a weakness, and the attackers do take advantage of this. A common example of giving too much privilege is when all users have local admin rights. This is great for the user because they can install applications, run tasks that require permissions, all without interruption. However, this also means that malware or hackers using this account have much more access to the device. This is great for hackers, but it's bad news for us. With the right tools and policies in place, we can ensure that any user, application, or device only has the permissions required to do what's needed, and not a single bit more. An example of this is something called just enough access. This is where we provide only the necessary access required for a job. There's also something called just-in-time access. This is where we can provide access to resources, such as virtual machines, only for a set amount of time. Once this time is up, the access is then removed. The last principle of Zero Trust that we will discuss is assume breach. Now, this means that we're not just trying to stop cyber attacks, but we're going to assume that the systems will be breached at some point, if they haven't already. By taking this mindset, we can start to plan our defenses for if the worst should happen. The first thing to do is segment our systems to reduce the blast radius. What this means is we reduce the damage done if an attacker is able to get access. We can reduce the area of a network they can access by using network segmentation. And we should also use user-based segmentation to limit the scope of the credentials. As well as reducing the blast radius, we must implement measures to detect and respond to these breaches. We must ensure we have the tools to provide visibility and the tools and services to respond to threats in real time. Okay, so we now know the theory behind Zero Trust and why it's so important. But how do we actually start to implement this stuff? Well, as mentioned at the start of this video, complete Zero Trust cannot be achieved with just a single tool or service. You need a range of tools and policies to implement Zero Trust. But let me give you a real-world example so you can get hands-on with some zero trust tools. The tool we're going to be looking at is called Twingate, which provides something called Zero Trust Network Access, also known as ZTNA. Zero Trust Network Access provides everything we've already spoken about. In-depth verification and least privilege policies for your users who need access to the corporate resources. Now don't worry, because Twingate is completely free for up to 5 users, which is more than enough for your home networks and for small teams. So here is my home network. In my network, I have a NAS, or Network Attached Storage. This NAS drives hold all of my video files. I want to be able to access this NAS drive from anywhere. I could be at home, in a coffee shop, or on the road. I need to be able to access my NAS drive. I also have an editor called Peter, and I may want Peter to access my NAS drive as well. Now, of course, I could use a simple VPN to do this. However, I want to implement the zero trust principles of verification, device compliance, and least privileged. Twingate makes this super simple to do. So let's get this set up now. The first thing we need to do is go over to twingate.com and set up a free account. Just go over to try Twingate for free. Once we've done that and signed in, it's just a simple 3-step process. We need to set up a network, set up a connector, and then install the client. So first we need to set up a network. We'll hit the Add Remote Network button. This is the network we want remote access to. So as we can see, we have options for the 3 major cloud providers, AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. But in my case, I'm going to select on-premise because the NAS drive's at my house. So we select on-premise, and then we're going to give it a name. So I'm going to go with home because it's my home network. Then hit Add Remote Network. And just like that, we have our first network, but it's currently empty. But don't worry, we are going to fix that. And this is where we implement our first bit of zero trust. Instead of giving access to the entire network, here I'm going to specify exactly what can be accessed. And we do that using a resource. So I'm going to click Create Resource. Then I'll give it a name. This is going to be my NAS. And then I'm going to give it the IP address. The IP address for my NAS drive is 192.168.1.87. Not only am I going to restrict the IP address, but I'm also going to restrict the ports that can be used to access my NAS drive. So I'll do that by clicking Ports. And for TCP, I'm going to allow port 5000, which is the port for the web admin. And I'm going to allow the port number 445. This is for SMB, which will allow me to access the files remotely. Then I'll just disable UDP and I'll disable ICMP as well. So here's my IP address. Here are the only ports that you can access it on, and then I'll click Create Resource. You're then asked to select which users will have access. By default, you have an everyone's group and it's just me, so I'll select that and hit the Add button. Okay, so now we have our network and our resource defined. We now need to deploy a connector. This connector sits somewhere in the network and is what makes the connection possible. So to deploy the connector, I just have to click on one of these interestingly named connectors on the left-hand side. So I'll go with Classy Bobcat, and then we're taken to the deployment page. As we can see, we have tons of different options to deploy the connector. All are pretty straightforward, but to be honest, the easiest one is going to be Docker. So that's the one I'll select. I'll click Docker, and then all we need to do is generate some tokens. So I'll scroll down, hit the Generate Tokens button. Of course, we have to authenticate. Remember, verify everything. So we'll re-log in. And once generated, the tokens will be added to the command at the bottom. Now, all we need to do is run this command on some type of machine. Now, this could be a computer you have lying around the house, Windows or Linux, it doesn't matter. It could be a Raspberry Pi, or it could even be the NAS drive itself, assuming it supports Docker. In my case, I'm going to use a virtual Ubuntu machine. So I'll pull up that machine here, log in, and all I have to do is open up a terminal. The first command to run is sudo apt update. and this will go through looking to update all of your packages. Then the next command is sudo apt install docker.io. Now this command will install Docker on the virtual machine. Again, this will only take a minute to go through. Once done, we just need to take that command from TwinGate and paste it into here. But do not forget to type sudo before you copy it, or it will probably fail. So go back to TwinGate, click the copy command button, go back to our virtual machine and paste that in. Hit the enter button and it will start to work its way through. So now that's completed, we can go back to TwinGate and check to see if the connector is now online. So currently it says not connected, but if I hit the refresh button, with a bit of luck, as we can see, the status has now changed to connected, meaning our connector is now live and working. We do have the option to add multiple connectors for redundancy, but I'm just going to leave it as the one for now. So now we have our resources defined, our connector deployed. Now the only thing left is to download the client and test it out. Okay, so I have my iPad here and I'm going to pretend that I'm on the road. Now it's tethered to my mobile, so it's a completely separate network to my local network here. To download the client, we need to go to twingate.com/download. And as you can see, we have a download option for pretty much every device. Now, of course, I'm on an iPad, so I'm going to choose iOS and hit the download button. Okay, so I have the client, but before I connect, I want to show you that it will fail if I try to access my NAS drive from here. So I'm going to open up the browser, I'm going to go to a new tab, and remember that IP address, that local IP. So it's http://192.168.1.87. And the port number for the web admin page is 5000. So I'll press the enter button and yep, as expected, it looks like it's going to fail. So now what I'm going to do is connect to that client. So we'll log in and it'll ask for a couple of prompts. And now I'm connected to the client. So with a bit of luck, if I go back to my browser, hit the refresh button, I now have access to my NAS web admin. Remember, I'm tethered off my phone on the mobile network, which is completely separate to my local network here. An important note here is I'm actually using the local IP address for my NAS drive as if I was sat in the local network. I don't need to mess around with port forwarding or DNS names. Super simple to set up. So I should even be able to create a network share from here. So if I open up the Files app, press these dots at the top and connect to server, I should be able to type in that local IP address, hit the enter button, use a registered user for my NAS drive, it requires authentication. And yes, now I've connected to the NAS drive via a shared drive. I click onto my videos and then go to Serpros videos, archives, and now I have access to all of the files I need securely from anywhere in the world. Remember, we're applying the principles of zero trust. So let me just show you what happens if I try to get access to my home router. So we already know I have access to the NAS drive, but if I were to go to my home router, which is 192.168.1.254 and press enter, again, it fails because I'm only given access to my NAS drive and those port numbers we specified. Everything else is out of bounds. No access whatsoever. This is the principle of least privilege, only given enough access to do the job. Now we can go even further, and to do that we need to go back over to TwinGate. We can even assess the devices that are allowed to connect. If we go over to Devices, and then Security, Here we can set the minimum device requirements before they're allowed to connect. Things like screen locks must be enabled, antivirus must be installed, and encryption is required. This all adds yet further verifications to our connections, meaning just because someone has the right credentials doesn't mean they'll be allowed to connect. So for example, if I want to allow iOS devices to connect to my NAS drive, I probably don't want devices without a screen lock to be able to connect, because anyone could just pick it up off the desk and then access my files. So I can come over to here, click screen lock not required, and change that to required, and confirm the changes. Now, any iOS device that doesn't have a screen lock will not be allowed to connect to my NAS drive. Again, adding further protection to my data. So if you want to get hands-on with some zero trust and secure your network connections, use the link below for your free TwinGate account. Okay, so there we have it. Zero trust is not a single tool or technology. Instead, it's a concept achieved by implementing security policies and tools that align with the core principles of never trust, always verify. If you liked this video and you got some value from it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe. The support from you guys really helps this channel grow. A big thank you to TwinGate for sponsoring this video. You can find the link below, and remember, it's completely free. Thank you for watching.